this week's call. And this week we want to talk about Ansible variables. The tools that we are using normally are making use of the variables, and we want to generally talk about Ansible and variables because it's actually an integral part where it's a very important building block for Ansible. And in our tools, we are using these variables, but then we have not spent much time checking and peeping through where these variables are defined and which files are they defined. So today we want to go a little bit more and check and explain these variables even more. So next slide talks about Ansible variables, and they are helping us deal with differences between different systems. For instance, in our deployment tools, one of the things that varies from one deployment to another is fully qualified domain name, for instance, or email address, or whatever a thing that you want to set, like even time zone, depending on the locations that you are sitting. Those things are not the same. And if it were not for variables, then it would be very difficult for us to set these values. And Ansible provides a way of dealing with those differences for different deployments and systems. This screenshot here shows us some file where we have defined our variables. And this is just an inventory file. It has 5 variables. One is FQDN, which stands for fully qualified domain name. And in all the deployments that we make, and we want our dhis2 instance that we are deploying to be accessible from the internet, it needs to have a domain name. It needs to have a subdomain of a domain. And in this example, as you can see, we have dhis.skipkurgat.com. It's one of, just an example, and also an email. These are variables, and as you can see, they are defined in a way where you put a variable and then equal sign, and then you put the value. So, so this is just one of the ways, or rather, this is one of the methods that you can define your variables. But there are so many other different, or rather, there are so many different ways that you can define your variables. One of where we can define them, and also we can register them during runtime. When you run your Ansible playbooks, other variables are registered along, along the way.
You are muri delivery, can go muri postinet. Me ana se kombona ushize muri delivery. Number following in postpartum.
So variables are of different types. One of the type is just a simple variable like dhis2 version. That is pretty much a simple variable where you have a variable definition and then value, like dhis2 version is 238. Is a very simple variable definition. And then we have Boolean variable definition, where it can be a true or false, yes or no. And yeah, and it takes Boolean variable types takes different values, and I've just put one of the valid value, which is yes. It can also take T, yes, Y, on, 1 or 0, false, and it can be false with capital F or false with all small letters. It takes different values. And then we have list variable. It's just an array of items. And here, as you can see, we have an example of an array variable, which is PostgreSQL extension. It's a list of 3 items, that is PostGIS, P3GIN, and PG_TRGM. So these are the extensions that we normally, or rather are required when you are setting up PostgreSQL to be consumed by the dhis2 instance. Hamza, could you please mute?
Thanks, I'm muted.
Okay, so I've seen also on chat where people are asking where we keep these slides after the presentation. And yes, we have a folder which I'll share during this call. It has all the slides that we normally use during our Thursday call presentations, and I'll make them public, at least so that you can all get there and explore the same slides. So we have also dictionary variable where it's just a hashed use key value pairs. And as you can see here, it's just an example. And rarely is a dictionary variable in our tools. We are using it rarely. We are not even, I don't think there's a place we are using dictionary variable. Most of the variables that we have, and as you can see, are the first 3: simple variables, Boolean variables, and the list variables, because those are the variables that we have in our deployment tools. So variable definitions. When you want to define your variables, as I've mentioned, there are 22 different ways or places or locations or files where you can put your variables. Okay, one of the file is the inventory file. Okay, this file is where you have a list of your servers which you want to manage. And in our deployment tools, it's under inventory directory, and the file is called hosts. So in that file, we have variables defined that we are using during our deployment process. And while we have asked users to change a few items in that file, there are other places where these or rather those variables are defined. Although, for instance, if a user doesn't supply a variable at all, then we need to instruct Ansible to supply defaults so that we cannot get errors during runtime. And these defaults are defined elsewhere. And yeah, so another place where you can define your variable is a playbook. Playbook is a file that has a list of tasks, and on that playbook also you can put an argument where you put a parameter, so where you can instruct or rather define your variables. You can also include files on your playbook, include files that you have within some directory, or just if you have a file within some other files apart from the playbook, can just include all of them. And also on a task level, you can define your variable. And also at runtime, when you're running your playbook, you can use extra var. There is an argument or parameter you can supply during runtime, and then you can supply your variable. So this is just a list of 5 different locations where you can put your variables, but there are 22 different locations that you can use to put, and we shall see that in the coming slides. I think the last slide of today's presentation, where we can see which are all these other different ways or locations where you can define your variables. So these 4, or rather 5, are really the most common, which we've used in our dhis2 server tools. So when I switch to my terminal, as you can see, let me just zoom out. Is it visible from your end?
Yeah, you can see it. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the inventory file, and this inventory file has a list of instances, and these instances are grouped, as you can see. Group number 1 is web, and then number 2 is databases, instances, and monitoring. And then under those groups, we have server definition, instance definition, and we are giving them names, although for SSH, because behind the scenes, under the hood, we are using SSH connection. We want to put Ansible host. And then now down here is where we have our variables, as you can see. And most important variables that we need all the time is fully qualified domain name and email, and also time zone. Time zone needs, you can take it here. It's one of the important variables that needs to be defined every time when you're running or when you're deploying dhis2 with the tools. So as you can see, these variables are defined such that you have key and then equal sign and then value for that key. And email, it's using equal sign because this is INI format definition, but you can define variables in YAML format, where instead of using equal sign, you use full colon. But at least when you are using INI format inventory file, you need to use equal sign. And notice that variables can be defined or grouped so that they can be shared. For instance, here we have variables defined under all group. This all here is a group, okay? And full colon var. So that means these are variables that are shared across all the hosts here, all the hosts that are defined in this inventory file. We have another group here. Instances vars. So that means these are variables that are shared across instances group. And as you can see, we have instances group here. So these variables here applies only to that group and not other group. So you can also define variable alongside, for a particular instance. Like here, HMIS instance has a very specific database host defined to be Postgres. So even though we have defined that under instances vars group here, it takes precedence. It wins because this variable database host is defined in 2 different places. It's been defined as on the inventory, on the host line, and also it's been defined on the group variable. So Ansible needs to know which one is it going to use, because it's been defined in two different places. That is where precedence rules comes in. And for this example, this one wins because it's more specific. It's more specific and more. And it's not more general that like group or other instances.var variable. So if we had, for instance, if we had another variable here, like database host equals to Postgres, then we have two groups here. We have all groups, which applies to all the hosts that are defined on this inventory file. And we have instances group, which is more specific than all group. All group is all the hosts that we have within this inventory file. And instances group is more specific than all group, because even instances group is a member of all group. So yeah, this is how variables are defined in an inventory file. And as you can see, we have other variables down here, and it's using equal sign because it's an INI file format. So, so we have other variables defined in a YAML file, like vars.yaml. So these variables are defined, and as you can see, 3 dashes there, it implies that this is a YAML file. And notice that here we are not using equal sign because this is a YAML format. We are using full colon for that. We are not using equal sign. So that is the difference. If you're dealing with INI format, file format, you're using equal sign. And in most cases, it's only inventory file that is in INI format. Otherwise, in all the other places, format is in YAML. Even the playbook is in YAML. So that is inventory. And then let's check an example of where variables are defined in a playbook. Here, let's just check our usual dhis2 deploy playbook. And this is where we have it. And see that we have fast play, and there's no variable defined here. And the second one, we have variable defined, but not directly. They have been defined from variable var files. They have been defined from var files. So usually these checks from the current directory, it checks for a vars directory. Let's make use of this other window. Here we have vars directory, as you can see, selected down here. So this definition here tries to check within the current directory if you have vars directory on it, like this. And then it loads all the files within that. It loads all the YAML file within that var directory. But we are even more specific here because we wanted to check on vars directory and then load vars.yaml. And in that directory, we have vars.yaml. So in this example, we are loading variables from a file, and that file is in vars directory. Let's just navigate into that directory, vars. And as you can see, we have 2 files, but then here we have instructed Ansible to specifically load vars.yaml file, which we had checked in a few minutes ago. It has a few or 2 variables to be specific. And yeah, so another way of defining variables here is that you just add vars directive, and then you put your variable here. Say dhis2, for instance, version, and then full colon 239 or 240, whichever version that you want. So this is in this case, you have defined another variable, which is dhis2 version, and you have put within the playbook. This is the playbook. You have supplied that variable here. And note that we had said variables can be a list. You can also put PostgreSQL extensions here. There's no harm, and to supply a list where it's pgtrm other extensions, and the list goes on and on. So this is just a simple variable, but this is a list variable, as we have talked about those. So we've seen that how you can define variables in a playbook, and also included files is one of the examples. Is these vars files, and that we have included vars.yaml file. So yeah, and then at runtime is another way of defining your variables when you're running your playbook. So you can when you want to run your playbook, you can use -e Ansible playbook help, shows you items that you can use when you're running your playbook, and there is -e somewhere, or extra vars. Here it is, extra vars. So you can set additional variables as key equal value, or in YAML JSON file format while you are running your playbook. These are variables that you want to define when you're running your playbook. So you can say Ansible playbook, and then the playbook that you want to run, dhis2.yaml, and then extra vars, and then you supply like dhis2 version is equals to 2.39 for instance. So this is another way also of supplying variables that you want to be used in your playbook. Yeah. Also within the task, you can define your variable. You can define your variable in a similar way, where we've defined here, similar way where of how you can define them in a playbook. Let's just check an example of how we've done that. All Postgres task LXD. See here, this is a task, and it has a variable defined there. So this is a variable defined in a task level, in a task level. Oh, yeah. So there are other variables that are registered when you're running your playbook. Yeah, there are other variables that are registered when you're running your playbook, or you're running your deployment script. And one of them is the, gathering facts. When you run your playbook, there is a directive which you can instruct Ansible to gather facts from the remote instance. And in that case, it connects to the remote host, and then it connects. It collects all the facts about that host. One of the facts is, for instance, version of the OS that is running there, code name of the operating system that is running on the remote host, and so many other facts that which we shall explore in a demonstration right now about the facts that are normally collected. And then there are other facts that you can register as an output of an Ansible task. You're using a keyword called register keyword. Let me just search where we have used register in our play. And as you can see, we have so many places where we have used register when we are running our playbooks. Let me find one that is a bit simple. This one. Let's check what is there. This is a task, one of the tasks that are included in our dhis2 deploy tools. It's checking PostgreSQL version, you know, and the reason why we want to get PostgreSQL version is for us to get the path where our dhis2 configuration file is. Remember, normally it's in etc PostgreSQL directory, but then it can either be 13, 14, 15, depending on the installed version of your PostgreSQL. Okay, so that changes. That's something that is very dynamic. That is why we want to get running PostgreSQL version before we try even to edit that file here, down here. So this is where we are collecting that fact. We are registering that variable, and we are using a module called PostgreSQL info. This is the module that we are using, and we're just getting PostgreSQL version, and then we register it. We save it somewhere in memory, and then we are using that PostgreSQL version info, as you can see down here. Yeah, we shall explore also how we can reference our Ansible, and this is really what we shall be talking about. We're using two curly braces to call our variables. So this is one of the examples of ways you can register your variable. However, this is just registering version. However, normally we are gathering facts in our playbook, and one of the tasks that gathers facts is the setup module. You know, this module gathers facts about whatever instance that we want to manage, whatever instance that we are setting up our some packages for instance. Then it gathers facts, a lot of information, even the gateway. And let me just check how I can gather facts about a system right now using ad hoc command. Ansible, the module is set up, and the server. Can even collect fact about this computer. Ansible connection. Module setup, inventory. I want to supply one of the servers. Do you still hear me, guys?
Management at a national
Yes.
So simply
Okay. I got notification that I've been signed out. I thought I'm not logged in. Optiplex. So I just want to connect to the server here that I have here, and then and then check the facts that are running on that server. etc. And I want to use ad hoc command. Just SSH. Ansible module. With ad hoc. So that's an ad hoc command, and I'm having a challenge using it to just gather facts so that we can check the facts that we have. So yeah, it should be something like this. So I forgot something here. I need to tell Ansible to connect to all, and then inventory is that, and then Ansible connection is equals to local. So this is going to give us facts that are gathered here, and yeah, it's a lot of information, as you can see. And normally you can reference this, and it gathers facts about these machines that I've actually connected to. It's just a local server that is in here, and as you can see, it's a lot of information, including the interfaces, including including the version of the OS that we are running here. It has a lot of information. In some cases, you want to use this information. For instance, in 2204 instance, or rather server, you want to install Java 11, or in 2204 instance, you want to install Tomcat 11. You want to use that variable later on. So these facts are gathered during runtime when you're running your playbook, and then you can use those information, or rather that information, to decide what to do. It can gather even the running memory. Let's just find here if we can find memory. And as you can see, Ansible memory MB, it tells you how many memory is it here on this instance. Gathered fact, how much memory do we have? You can see even CPU. Yeah, we have 4 CPU cores. So this information is very important, as you can even use it to decide how much CPUs, or how many CPUs you want to allocate to Postgres container, or how much memory you want to allocate to Postgres container, or so. And gateway IP address, let me check IP version 4. You see, we have IP version 4 details, version 4. There are so many places where this is defined. the gathered facts, and you can see. So this is just another way of collecting variables. Let's go to our presentations once more. Yeah, I've shown you how you can register fact during runtime with setup module. So in our deployment tool, we have used that setup module somewhere. Let's see, we have used it somewhere, and it's here. We do run setup and we gather facts. Although you can instruct Ansible not to gather all the facts. As you can see here, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of information, and sometimes it takes a while. It takes like 3 seconds or 5 seconds to collect these facts. So you can instruct Ansible to gather only some subset. And in our tools, we are asking it to gather facts relating to network information, and we should actually collect minimum facts, so that it's not enormous. And with that, we just want to use gathered facts to decide whether the correct IP address is set or not, and whether to restart container or not. And also later on, we are using the facts. Let me just draw Postgres. Does Postgres install during the installation process? As you can see here, we are using distribution release. When you're setting up Ansible repository, you need to have distribution release, whether it's dummy, depending on whether you are running 18.04 or 20.04 or 22.04, distribution release versions are normally different. So, and to set up repo for Postgres, you need to have that. And depends on whether you chose to use different version when you're setting different container versions. You can choose to use 20.04 containers or 22.04 containers, but then Ansible needs to be intelligent enough to gather facts regarding that, and then use it to in this example, set up repository, PostgreSQL repository. So that is where it's actually used in real life. So here, this slide tells us how to use variables. Yeah, well, we've seen various ways we could define variables, various places we can put variables. And I've mentioned playbook, I've mentioned the task, or gathered facts, or within the inventory file. Well, those are just places where you normally define your variables. But then how do you use these variables? And there are places where you use variables. One is module arguments. These that we were checking a few seconds ago are modules. They are tasks. Modules are used within tasks, and sometimes you don't want to hard code arguments within those modules, and you just want to use variables, things that might change, things that are dynamic. So you use variables on module arguments. We use variables also in templates. We shall check that on how that is actually how that is being actually used in real life. And then conditionals, those are when statements. So this screenshot here has a module, and the module is Community General PostgreSQL Extension. And then this module have arguments, and one of the arguments is name. So this module name, module argument name, is using a variable, as you can see, and the variable here is not just a simple variable; it's a list. It's a list, and it's trying to get that down here. Yeah. So I want us to check another simple argument, like another simple variables like dhis2 version, where it's being used and where it's being defined. dhis2 version normally is being defined in inventory host file down here. As you can see, this dhis2 version, you define it here, or if you want, you can be more specific and append on the line that has your instance here, say 239. So this is more specific, and this will win when you run your playbook, because it's more specific than this one, which is defined on the group level. And once you have defined this variable, it's actually being used somewhere. And let's check how it's being used. We can just find in our tools dhis2 version, and it's actually being used in some in places. Or here, dhis2 setup line 16. And as you can see here, we are using dhis2 version. It's here, but then this is even explaining the next example when statement, you know, where you are running this task here only when dhis2 version is defined. Yeah, but then let's check within this file where other place where dhis2 version is being used. Let's just search dhis2 version. Yeah, it's used there, and then here it's also being used. Notice that for when statements, you don't use curly braces, you don't use these curly braces. But then for module arguments, this is a module, and this is a module argument. You need to use these curly braces for you to be able to reference the dhis2 version. Next. And to just find a good example, leave alone the when statements. When statements are, well, it's using the dhis2 version variables, but it's not using this. It's not using these curly braces. It's not using these curly braces, as you can see here. So, well, that is how to reference variables under when statement. You don't need to use curly braces. However, in other places like here, you need to use curly braces when you're referencing your variable. Yeah. Another variable that we are using in our deployment, let's check inventory hosts. Let's check where Ansible connection is being used. Well, this is where you've defined your variable Ansible connection, but where is it actually being used in our playbook? Let's search Ansible connection. Yes, it's being used even to load some task here. Sorry, typo. As you can see here, I'm including some tasks, but then I'm using variable here. Notice that I'm using curly braces. And what is this doing is that it tries to reference Ansible connection variable. And depending on how you had defined it, in this case, it will be LXD. So it means it will be including tasks LXD.YAML for this example, because inventory host is set to be, Ansible connection is set to be LXD. So in that case, this is going to be a replacement. It's going to be like this. Instead, it's going to be something like this. Something like that, yeah. So it's going to include task LXD.YAML. But then we are not hard coding LXD here. It's going to load some variable defined. And as you can see, we had defined it in the inventory file, and it would be LXD.YAML. Yeah, so that is one of the example where we have used that. Templates. Templates, we have so many templates, and one of the templates that we use is Nginx templates, for instance, proxy templates, Nginx. Let's check, is it instance? Sites.ginger2. So this is Nginx template. It is not normal configuration file, as you can see. It has curly braces. It has these curly braces and then variable in them. Curly braces and then variable in them. So this will replace this whole thing with the variable, which is your fully qualified domain name. In my case, it's going to be dhis2. This one, kipkurka.com, but then it depends on your deployment. If you are, of course, your domain name is going to be different. So this is going to be replaced here, as you can see. And also server name here, it's going to replace with the fully qualified domain name. Wherever you have these two curly braces and something in between, that is a variable, and it's going to replace all this thing with a variable, okay? Even SSL type, we have some place where we have defined our SSL type. We should see it somewhere here. Here, SSL type, let's encrypt. So that means SSL certificate is gonna be loaded in either let's encrypt or it can be custom SSL or upstream, whichever type that you chose. And yeah, so this is just one of the template file where variables are being used, okay? Another way is conditionals, when statements. You know, when you're writing tasks, Ansible tasks, others, you need, and you're using variables in them, what will happen when you don't have those variables defined? It will throw an error. It will give you an error. It will give you an error. So to mitigate that, you're using conditionals, you're using if statements. You're saying run this task only if this variable is defined, only if this variable is defined, just to make sure that your playbook is resilient to even errors of variables not defined, you know. Then you're using when statements, you're using conditionals. So that is one, and I want to show us where we are using these conditionals. And I mean, there are so many places. If I just search when, you can see there are a lot more places where we are using when conditionals to instruct things to do while running our playbooks. One of the simplest example is just, let's check this main playbook. And here we are using when statement, and when statement. This is an if statement, for instance, that we are telling Ansible to run Ansible connection, which is in our case lxt.yaml file, only when inventory else host name is in group web. In our inventory file, we have groups. You can see web, database, instances, and monitoring. And in these groups, we are running, like on web group, we have proxy, and we are running tasks specifically that are actually reserved only for proxy, like installing Nginx, installing Apache 2, for instance. Those things are only going to be run on the proxy. You don't need to install Nginx on Postgres, for instance. You don't need to install Postgres database on HMI's instance, or you don't need to install Tomcat on all these other instances. You don't need to install Tomcat on. You will only install Tomcat on dhis2 instance, for instance. So that means you need to have a way of telling Ansible to run certain tasks on certain hosts, and that is when that is how when statement is useful. This one is a playbook called proxy. So we are running these, but then only on groups web. That is where we have proxy in our definition. And also for us to run this task, we need to have proxy defined. Otherwise, if proxy is not defined, and as you can see here, we have proxy somewhere here in the next. Sometimes this is not, this might not be defined, like it's even commented out like that. That means this variable is not defined. So that means these tasks defined here will not be included, only, or rather they will be included only when when proxy is defined. Yeah, so yes, that is one of the example of using when conditionals, that you are instructing Ansible to do things only when certain condition is met. Yeah, and those conditions are dependent on the variable definition. Okay, yes. You might be asking yourselves, what is this inventory hostname? This is a magic variable. This is variable that you don't need to define. It just checks the running host that that is defined on the inventory hostname on the inventory file. So all these hosts that you see here are the inventory. They are list of servers, and when you debug, for instance, inventory hostname, you will find these names, so they are defined as per the inventory host file. We have, for instance, here 4 inventory hosts: proxy, Postgres, HMIS, and monitor. When you just debug, or when you just want to know what inventory hostname is, it will be all these, but then we're telling Ansible when inventory hostname really is in group web. Otherwise, don't run this, don't load this playbook, for example. Yeah, that is when conditional, when statements. And I can give you an example of when you will use this conditional. For instance, in the very coming days, we'll have DHIS 241, and 241 or 240 has support for Tomcat or for Java 17. So you can say in some tasks, if inventory, or rather if DHIS2 version is 240, then install Java 17, for instance. So you can just write a task, and then a task that installs Java 17, and then down there you say when DHIS2 version is 240 or 241. So that will run, or rather installing Java 17 will only happen if DHIS2 version is 240 or 241, and these when statements can take various forms. You can say when it's greater than some number, when it is a string, when it is a floating, it takes different variables, or when it is a list, it takes, you can do a lot of things with these when statements. You can even tell Ansible to run some task when a variable is a list. Just check if that variable defined is a list, and then run this task. Or run this task when a variable defined is a string, for instance, so that if it's an integer, don't do anything. Yeah. Next is where should I put a variable? We have seen that these variables can be defined in so many different places. And now, where do you put your variable? In the tools, I've actually put most variables in one place, which is usually inventory host file. Okay, I've put all the necessary required variables within this inventory host file. However, you can decide to place these variables in some other file, or in some other location. Really, where should you now? How do you make that decision? So Ansible will load all the variables irrespective of where you have had them defined. And then after it finishes loading all these variables, it chooses to apply one based on the precedence rules. there are variables that are more strong than, place where you define your variable defines whether there'll be or losing the battle of being chosen. So different variables defined in different places will override each other. Of course, it follows some order. And I think this is the order that normally is followed when you run your playbook. And as you can see, command line values like -u, my user, this really would not take a list preferred. This list that you have here means that this number 22 here wins. It always wins. And number 1 here will always be overwritten. And as you can see here, we have extra vars, those that I showed you that you can define during runtime. Those variables will always win. Of course, we have seen that you can define the dhis2 version in so many different places. But if I run this Ansible playbook and then dhis2.yaml, for instance, and then extra var, and then supply dhis2 version is equals to 240, irrespective of whether I have had 239 defined in my inventory file, irrespective of whether I have 237 defined elsewhere. This will win. This will be the variable that will be used in my playbook, okay? Because as you can see here, it's winning precedence all the time. Inventory file in this list is down here. You see, it's down, well up, but least preferred. It's number 4 in the least preferred order. So that means if you have that variable defined elsewhere, in include parameters, include vars, task var, it will be overwritten. That you have in your inventory group vars all. In fact, ours is inventory file script. Yeah, ours is in inventory file. Sorry, it's not in the group file. Ours is in inventory file, and it's in all group. Notice that even in inventory file, you have groups. Okay, we have all group, which is just a group of all all group matches everything. It's every group that you have in your inventory file is a member of all group. And in our case, we have 4 groups. We have Tomcat, we have proxy, and then we have instances, databases. So that means all group is having other child groups which we have like instances, and within instances you can define variables for that particular group. And in that case, inventory file will try even to have, there is also even precedence within the inventory file. And I had shown you that before, inventory host. There is precedence in that, I have this edited here. There is precedence in that variables that you define within all group will be overwritten with variables that are defined in a more specific group like instances. And even what you have within the instances group can be overwritten with what you have on a particular host. That means database host Postgres overwrites database host that you have defined here, and this one also overrides database host that you've just defined on all group. Okay, that is an example of precedence rules. So this is a document. It's actually Ansible variable documentation file. It has all the information that we have talked about and even more. and how you can deal with Ansible. And within in this presentation that I have today, I've also included a link to that documentation for Ansible. And I have actually showed you the precedences, and this is how it happens. Whatever you define in extra var will always wins. There are variables that you define in include parameters. There are variables that you define in roles, yeah, and include vars. We are not defining our variables in all places. In our case, we have variables defined in the inventory file, one, and another one is roles, variables, roles, Postgres, defaults. We have variables here. And where is it in the precedence file? It's in role defaults. Let's check role defaults. We have role defaults. And as you can see, it's the least, close to least preferred, role defaults main.yaml. This file is roles Postgres default main.yaml. That means this is nearly the least preferred. When you have PostgreSQL extension defined elsewhere, then that means whatever you have here will be overwritten automatically. And and which other place do we have our variables? Let's check. This is roles defaults, as you can see, we have seen Postgres defaults, but then there is also Postgres vars main.yaml. We don't have anything here, but this is another place you can define your variables. If I had, sorry. If I had these two files here, this is the default file, and if I had this here, this is, as you can see down here, yeah, it's not even showing, but this is the vars file. Let me just exit all and then edit it once more. This is the vars file, and it has this variable definition, and I want to open another default, another file within the same directory, this one. And as you can see, it also has PostgreSQL extension. Yeah. So you ask yourself, which one will now get used? Which one will be used during runtime? And to answer that is that this will be used on my left, because it's defined in roles vars. Let's see, it's here, number 15. It's defined in role var main.yaml, while the one on our left, here is defined in roles default. And if you see, roles default is very weak here. Roles default is very weak. So the one that is in role var will win and be used than the one defined in role default. But as you have seen, we didn't have anything here anyway. We didn't have anything defined on this file. I'm rarely using that file because normally it overwrites other things. It will even overwrite what we have in our inventory file. You see, inventory file here. Whatever you have in your roles vars will even overwrite whatever you have in your inventory file. So I rarely use, or I rarely define my variables here, because they will overwrite whatever will be defined in my inventory file user. And remember, that is where users deploying DHIS2, that is the file that they touch. They don't touch a file they don't even normally think of another file that is defined in vars main.yaml. They just know that things that we need to tweak is in inventory file. So normally that's why I don't have my variable defined here. But you realize that I have variable defined in role defaults main.yaml. Yeah. Reason is this file is weak. This wherever I have there is easily overwritten with what I have in my inventory file. So that means even if I have variables defined in that file, like the dhis2 version, they'll not take effect. What will be used is what user defines in the inventory file. Even though I'll have that defined in the defaults, file, then it will not be used. What would win precedence is what user supplies in the inventory file. Why do I have then variables here? And the reason is that I want to also deal with situations where user maybe, for instance, don't define a variable. So if you don't define a variable by default, that means you will install, for instance, roles dhis2 defaults main.yaml. If you don't define the dhis2 version in your inventory file, then this will be used. But if you define the dhis2 version in the inventory file version, inventory file, say 240, it will overwrite this. Okay, so that's something that I have in my mind when setting up these variables. If you don't instruct Ansible to use, for instance, Java 17, because if we check inventory file, inventory host file, there is Java version somewhere here, Java version is 11. But you can, if you're setting up the dhis2 version 240 or 241, you might want to do 17 here, okay? However, in some situations, you don't define this. You might even delete this at all. So this will throw an error because the dhis2 version is not, Java version is not defined. So to capture that or to deal with that, I normally have defaults within the defaults, or rather dhis2 defaults main file, so that if user don't define these variables, then I should be using the defaults defined in this file. However, if you define anything here, it overwrites that. Yeah, that's the end. That's the end. Let me share this documentation with you guys so that you can use and even explore more about variables, variable types, and even more, okay? Any questions?
Yes, teacher, may I ask a question? I have a question on the groups. What if maybe we have many hosts in one group? How can we define them?
Yeah, so this is the inventory file, and this is the host, the host defined, and maybe you have two databases, for instance. You have Postgres, and you have another one. Maybe you have prod database instance, and you have test database instance. Of course, they'll be running from different IP addresses. So this can be 20 and this is 21, okay? Yeah, so this is how you add host under a group like this. You just add a line under that group, and you can add as many as you want. You can even add training database here, training instance, and it's definitely going to have a different IP address. Of course, having different databases defined and not using them is not making sense. So you need to have instances also. Maybe you have, maybe you have another test instance here. test instance. And on this test instance, you don't want to use Postgres, or you don't want this one. Maybe this one is a production. You want to use prod instance, and test instance, you want to use test database. The database, as you can see, you can define database host by per instance, or rather by dhis2 instance that you deploy. And you can have the third one. And the third one in your case is going to be training, and training is going to be using another database server, which is going to be training for purposes of this example. And of course, your instances will need to have different IP addresses. Of course, you don't run them from within the same server. So this is going to be, say, the 12, the 13. And in situations where you are running all these instances on some on the same box, then that means there'll just be containers created, and they'll be named according to these names that you define on these instances group. Yeah, yes. So of course we have defined that we have 3 databases. We have prod database, test database, a training database, and we have used these databases defined here by instructing our instances to use different database instances which we have defined up here. Of course, if you don't define, you say you have the fourth one, say dhis2. If you don't define anything, you get, of course, you need to have Ansible host. This one needs to be there because it's the IP address. They need to be really 2.12, say 15, for instance. Then it uses the default. And it tries to see if Ansible database is defined here. If it's not defined, it uses what is defined in the group host, instance var. So it says, because I don't have a database, I'll just use what is in my group, which is Postgres in this example. And if everything is not there completely, then it uses what is in the defaults file. You see, dhis2 defaults main file, because this is the one that is really, it's least preferred, so to speak. So it checks based on the precedence levels. Is that answering your question?
Yes. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was still having a lot of questions. Probably I will ask them in the next session. Because I tried to set this up and failed. Maybe I'll ask this for the questions in the next session.
Okay.
Thank you.
What did you try to? I mean, you tried using different databases. Is that what failed?
What failed is just to run the basic commands. Like I think there is a module called ping, right? I tried to run that module and I failed. It just returned some crazy responses and I could not understand it.
That is what we actually did last week. That the Ansible basics that we were dealing last week. We demonstrated how we can run ad hoc commands against a pool of rather a list of servers, like even checking if the firewall is running without writing a playbook, just using command module and then connecting to those servers and checking if things are set up the way, we last week's session is recorded. I'll share the link with you once it's uploaded to YouTube, and then you can just follow, and then you can see how you can run ad hoc commands against a list of servers.
Yeah, I would appreciate if you share this. Thank you.
Vegito, where will you share the presentation for last week? Because I also want to have a look at it because I thought what was last week.
Okay, let me just copy the link right now. There's Google Drive link. Try accessing it. I'll just update permission and also add other presentations that are not currently present. We have one for last week and one for this week. I'll add also those that we dealt last time. We talked about last calls. All of them should be available here. Okay. I think we are even overdue. The time is supposed to be 1 hour. I should try in future to limit to just confine myself within 1 hour, because this is this is too much in a single session. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Goodbye, everyone. See you next week.
See you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.